Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another online debate organized by the Warsaw Institute with support of National Institute of Freedom. Today we'll discuss the key points of current migration geopolitical situation within the European Union. My pleasure to introduce my today's guests. First of all, Robert Gonzi, analyst from Migration Research Institute. Good evening, Robert.
Hello, Maciej. Good to be here.
And Bartosz Fraszka, expert from Warsaw Institute. Good evening, Bartosz.
Good evening, Maciej. Good evening, Robert. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining. Let's focus now on first question of our today's debate. First of all, I will ask you for a pretty general overview related to current situation within the EU. I want to ask you what are the key ways in which the migration is influencing the current geopolitical landscape within the European Union, and how does that relate to security dynamics? I will give the floor to Robert first.
Thank you very much. So I would start with a re-question, which is how could we not assess migration when we are talking about geopolitical situation in Europe? Because we see a constant pressure of migratory tendencies, at least since 2015. We like to point out 2015 because it was a great boom regarding the immigration to Europe, but it was going on ever since the 60s. We have very different forms, such as the guest workers' arrival from the Middle East to the Western European countries, and all the way built up until the situation in Syria, which gave the big boom to the European external borders. And even though the latest Frontex data shows that we are currently experiencing a situation where less migrants are arriving to the European Union, so we see a 42% decline, at the same time, it means that still during this year, at least 166,000 people have arrived to the European Union via different routes. At least currently we have several routes to arrive to the European Union, 3 through the Mediterranean, 1 through Morocco to Spain, 1 through Northern Africa to Italy, 1 through Turkey to Greece, and several others, such as the Western African route to the Canary Islands, the Eastern route, which is currently one of the main entryways actually to the European Union from Belarus to Poland. And we have one external letting out point with the Brexit came into effect through the channel from France to the UK. But currently we see that overall the numbers are declining, but yet we still see that it means more people, just in a smaller tendency. The greatest problem with that is that we currently estimate that around 8 million people have arrived to the European Union as irregular migrants since 2014. Now, this is a huge number, and what I like to say is that the only irregulars we can count are the unlucky ones who got caught. So we don't really know the numbers of the exact numbers of the irregulars who arrived to the European Union. But a very interesting data regarding at least that 8 million people, what we know is that only 20% of all the irregulars who arrived to the European Union have been able to return to their homeland via repatriation or deportation. So we see that the European Union's methods to deal with the inflow of these irregulars is not immaculate. And of course, we see several other problems that can also build up geopolitical tension, such as the instrumentalization of migration, which is how the media likes to call it, the weaponization of migration. But I'm sure we are going to talk about it later. But we see several grounds at this moment at the European Union's border where it is currently conducted against the European Union as a hybrid warfare. Of course, at first we can mention Belarus against Poland, but also we can mention Russia at Finland, we can mention Morocco at Spain, or Turkey at Greece. So it's a very widespread method of political pressure tool that is currently used against the European Union. And of course, we see also the politicization of migration as it became a tool of political tendencies all across the continent. Because how could it be not? Like, we see the flaws, we see the problems, not just immigration, but integration as well. So it became like an internal division within societies that creates more tension, and that in the end realizes one more geopolitical tension within the alliance of the European Union.
Thank you very much, Robert. So as you said, we have decrease in numbers, but still we have a huge issue related to instrumentalization of migration, especially it harms Poland and Eastern NATO Eastern flank countries. But now we'll give the floor to Bartosz with the same question of the key ways in which migration crisis is influencing the geopolitical and security landscape of European Union.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll try to briefly answer your question, and I divided my answer into sections. Which one? First one relates to the geopolitical landscape. So, as Robert have said, we have been experiencing and we have observing the instrumentalization of migration, but the root of it, the baseline, is the securitization of migration, which is, the more theoretical aspect of this phenomena. And securitizing, the securitization means that we perceive something as a threat, and we perceive something as a danger to our security architecture, just to put it in a nutshell. So once we securitize the migration, so we now identify it as a threat, and that shapes our all security policies, our security agenda, and that, of course, influences our public debate about migration at all. Securitization of migration leads to the change of perception of migration flow. So, and that influence our political debate, that fits our extremists in the domestic dimension and the European level. So geopolitically, it just changes the whole policy of our on the EU level of how we treat this issue. As to the geopolitics, direction of migration flows are quite constant. I mean, we have southeast, and east. That are the most vital routes for migrants to get to Europe, and that doesn't change much. But and especially after 2011, after the Arab Spring, after 2014, the start of war in Donbass, and of course right now, since last 3 years after the Russian aggression in Ukraine, geography won't change much, so we have to deal with it. Like you must be aware of that, what is going on in its direct neighborhood. So we need to establish more intelligence-based analysis capabilities. I mean, the EU must be more present and reactive in its direct neighborhood, in the Middle East, in the West, and in Africa, because to be honest, in my humble opinion, that we are going to face the migration crisis, which on a much greater scale than till now, because of the demographic situation in Africa, and most of all, especially in the Sahel and Eastern African countries. The scale of migration pressure sets the new threshold of developments in the security policy, and that allows our authorities to adapt more accurate active measures, which can be observed in European countries like Poland, Germany, Austria, or Italy, first of all. So it's like just simple examples like no closure of borders. So it just breaks down the Schengen idea. No stricter migration and asylum policy. Of course, it's we wish to implement it on an EU level, but it's sometimes much easier to say than do, because we need to amass 27 particular national interests in once, which is actually impossible. So we are struggling with this issue because of the lack of effectiveness in the foreign policy on the EU level. And so this is the geopolitical landscape. And briefly on the security dynamics, um, decisive stalemate proves the EU's inability and incoherency in executing its security policy in internal as well as in external dimension. As I said, it lacks effectiveness, and it lacks tools that could implement EU agenda in the international dimension. So no strategies, no migration and asylum pacts, or no policies will change that, because it lacks. There is no political will among member states to merge their foreign and security policies in one, and this is the main obstacle which the EU is dealing right now, as far as the migration is concerned. European leaders advocate for tougher measures, much tougher, and they are referring to combating smugglers and addressing, instrumentalization, as Robert said, what is going on Polish-Belarusian border, like Greek-Turkey border, or wherever else. So we are looking at the only negative ways, on the negative phase of migration in terms of security. So there is a lot needs to be done, but we are stuck with our lack of political willingness. So that's my I hope brief answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have another interesting point mentioned by Bartosz to this discussion: the securitization of migration. And for the next question, I want to stay, Bartosz, with you. Recently, we learned about newest developments coming from Poland regarding temporary suspension of asylum rights. This is, of course, only a temporary solution to the wider problem. So I would like to ask you, how should the EU and the states themselves balance this national security concerns? Because this is only temporary solution, and how do you see the long-term perspective for balancing such security concerns?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you have mentioned the European Commission. So, in this regard, European Commission represents the EU's interest as a whole, not as the interest of particular member states. So, and due to the fact that national security policy falls within the remit of states' exclusive competence, hence the Commission can only moderate EU's policy in this regard, that it can contribute to the to member state security in the most effective possible way. So, in order to do that, European Commission must moderate wisely this approach toward balancing security on the European level. And it must limit its actions to strictly supporting states in securing their own national interests and national security, instead of creating obstacles on the EU level, and creating the confusion, and as well as the divisions in a more in the parliamentary level, on the council level. So it's quite important to bear in mind the fact that the national security is exclusive competence, and EU must support that, not create the alternative way of ensuring that. National security concerns differ among member states due to their different historical experiences and socio-economic situation, etc., etc. We can discuss and we can talk about it. We can talk about it a lot, but comparing different migration regimes, policies among member states is challenging task because it's specificity. So every country is in a separate individual situation, and EC European Commission must take that into account while trying to moderate its overall European policy, which that boils down to my conclusions from the first question, which is, in my humble opinion, impossible, because that demands the common denominator of all national interests, which is really impossible. And as recently introduced by Prime Minister Tusk, this temporary suspension of asylum rights, I see it as a best example of independent venture aiming to secure national security architecture with regard to the migration, as we specified earlier. It has been instrumentalized, weaponized, and by us securitized. So, it's this idea of introducing the temporary suspension of asylum rights has also reached the consensus on EU level, and that's good, because that proves a proper threat perception among European leaders. Polish politicians many times has emphasized that it is because of Poland's specific geopolitical location that we have been facing hybrid war. We have been the victim of a hybrid war conducted by Belarusian and Russian regimes since 3 years, more than 3 years. So I think it's obvious that we have to introduce such active measures. It's also an element of a broader new Polish migration strategy. Yeah, regain control, ensure safety. But I will not. I don't want to take you time to discuss that, because it's a very very broad subject. And just to briefly give you some data, it's very needed. It's very needed, but it is delayed in terms of protecting our safety, our citizens' safety. It is much delayed, but it's good that it has already happened, because by limiting the right to be on the Polish territory, we eliminate. We not eliminate, but reduce the threat of expanding any hybrid threats that could be aimed that could be when Polish, for instance, even critical infrastructure might be targeted by espionage, by terrorist attacks or sabotage, etc., which is quite commonly observed on the West. So, it is not against the people; it is against the system, which is using the people in order to influence our internal security. Poland is a very hospitable, very receptive country. I think we have proven that in 2022. In May, we have accommodated almost 4 million Ukrainians straight after the Russian invasion. Right now, 80% of foreigners who live in Poland are Ukrainians, and it is only in order to protect our own safety and national security architecture, and I think it's very reasonable, very needed, yet delayed.
Thank you very much for this detailed answer, Bartosz. And we have a lot of interesting questions coming from the chat. But before I will address them to you, let's first hear Robert's opinion on the same question: how the European Commission, European Union, and the member states should balance national security concerns when considering policies such as temporary suspension of asylum rights.
I would like to widen a bit the topic, because I see the real issue why we are currently talking about migration from a different perspective is the exact nature of this change in perception regarding migration. Because even though I visited Poland and its border with Belarus several times, so I know that the situation is dire. We cannot really act like this is the first situation when the European Union or Europe or European country has faced the instrumentalization of migration. Yet, this is the situation where we see a shift in European politics. That's why this situation that is currently faced by Poland is unique. And the reason for that is because right until the late 2000s and the beginning of the 2010s, migration was viewed as a net humanitarian issue. And only after 2015, we started to concentrate as Western nations to the reality that we are facing, that the migration has become this very diverse, very complex phenomenon with a lot of national security concerns as well, such as human smuggling, extremist groups, polarization of society. The result of the polarization is gang wars in several cities, which we are currently facing. We got news from Paris, Marseille, Göttingen, Stuttgart, Malmö, Göteborg, that we are currently facing several issues several national security concern issues, thanks to the polarization of societies that was the result of loose integration. And this shift takes time. And in 2015, the European Union member states were not ready to accept that the migrations perception has shifted from this Darfur perception that is a refugee crisis and we have to act to it like it. It's not just a refugee crisis anymore. This is also a national security crisis. And with the increasing of the tools that has been used by different malicious intent persons and states and organizations that want to have an effect, a negative effect on the European Union, started to use more and more brutal methods, such as a great example, of course, is Belarus against Poland and, of course, the NATO eastern flank, which happens to be also a European Union member state. So what we see is now that a shift has started, and especially because we not only realized that it is a national security concern, but we also started to see that it's slowly degrading all our achievements, such as Bartosz mentioned. The Schengen zone started to disappear in recent years. And that is a serious issue because it's a huge and great achievement of the European Union and we have to protect it. And that's the reason why the current situation came up thanks to the EU Migration Pact. The EU Migration Pact is an old school migration document that views the situation as a net humanitarian crisis. And of course, it reacts to people smuggling businesses. But if we look at that, it's also a humanitarian perspective. Of course, it has national security issues as well. But in the baseline, it is a humanitarian concern. It is a concern of the safety of the migrants who are arriving to Europe. And the Polish perspective that came in this situation, when we currently see that Poland, especially during this European summit that we have seen during the weekend, became one of the leading voices of the European Union thanks to the negative consequences that we see in interior politics of different great nations in the European Union, such as we see interior struggling in the chancellorship under Olaf Scholz, or we see government problems in France. And in that time, Poland, as a relatively strong member of the European Union, especially during this situation, stepped up and started to spread the word that we cannot look anymore the migration crisis, which in my personal opinion, is not stopped since 2015. It is currently ongoing with a little pause during 2020 when the COVID outbreak happened. But it is a constant flow of the inflow of people. And now we see slowly the shift. And if we look at the summit and we look at what other European leaders mentioned, we see that a front, a coalition is starting to form that starts to question the main perception of migration in Europe. So we have the Michel Barnier government from France, which started to talk about the speed track of deportation. We never heard anything like this before from France. Or there is the Meloni government, which outright mentioned that we have to rebuild ties with Syria. We didn't have any connection with Syria since 2011, thanks to the Assad regime's closeness to Russia. But we recently realized that without talking to Syria, we will not be able to solve the situation. And Turkey is not really the European Union's partner. Turkey is a blackmailer of the European Union through the same instrumentalizing methods that we see from Belarus and Russia. And of course, we have the Cypriots who mentioned that we have to sanction airlines who give cheap airfare tickets to migrants, what we have seen with Belarusian and Russian airlines, but we also have seen with Turkish Airlines, Emirates, Fly Dubai, Camping. So we have a ton of different national or close to national airlines that are currently using these hybrid methods against the European Union. And it also brought up the issue of national security. So in this position, currently, the Polish government could step up during this summit and could give voice to this new perspective, which is not a new perspective, because the exact situation that is happening is not a new situation. It's simply the shift of perspective and how much time does it take reached to this end that we are currently see the EU Migration Pact versus the realization of the new perspective of migration.
Thank you very much, Robert. You've mentioned Belarus a few times, and we have a question from the chat in relation to this country. In fact, we have more questions, so I will combine them and address them to you now. First of them is the EU prepared for the next wave of mass migration? And the second one is, what is EU doing to stop migration flows from Belarus and Ukraine? So I will address it to Robert, to you, and then to Bartosz.
Thank you. So we don't see a new wave of migration. In my perspective, we are currently seeing the same migration flow that we are experiencing now, that we experienced 3 years ago, and that we experienced for the last 10 years. This is the same result of the same happenings and the slow nature of processing in the European Union, because the European Union overall is a bureaucratic set of institutions. So it takes time for anything to change a perspective. And that's the reason why we are slowly building up against this situation. And that's the reason why the European Union was ineffective against the threats in migration, because migration is not a net negative phenomenon. Of course not. There is a chronic workforce situation in Europe, so we have to concentrate on immigration, of course. But at the same time, we see the negative effects, and it took time to realize these negative effects. And now we can say that we have at least 8 million people who we don't know who they are. Only 20% of them have been able by the European Union member states to be repatriated to their homes. And we do not know whether they returned or not, because I like the little star at Frontex reports, which said that they do not know whether these migrants that they are registering are returning or first-time arrivals. So we have to slowly catch up with the situation. And that's what more and more European Union members realize, that currently we are experiencing this situation in the same level, but now with more knowledge and experience. And regarding Belarus, and not only Belarus, so we also have seen these effects in Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Norway. So we can say that the Union state, because if we talk about Belarus, we cannot go without mentioning Russia. Like the cooperation between Minsk and Moscow is so strong that they basically have the same interior and border politics, because their text, their documents that they have signed since 1999 just doesn't let it to play out anything else. So what we see regarding the Union state is that they are building this up just as slowly as Russia built up the invasion against Ukraine, because that's the situation, that's the mental way of how the Union state actually works regarding these attacks, whether it's a direct military attack that we see in Ukraine, a hybrid warfare attack that we see via Belarus. And it is going on since more than 10 years. So the first tries regarding instrumentalization of migration happened in 2002, 2004, same Belarus against Poland. And then we had 2015, 2016, the bicycle migrants at the northern pole from Russia to Norway and Finland. So we have seen many, many tries until they figured out how the best way to make this work. and now we're experiencing it at the Polish border. What I am worried about personally is that the same Frontex document that came out that mentioned the numbers that I mentioned to you before says that currently group of migrants and refugees arriving from Belarus to Poland are not anymore Syrians and Iraqi people, they are Ukrainians. And now the Polish state has decided not to give any asylum to those who are arriving from Belarus. But what does it mean regarding the Ukrainians? What will happen to them? So we once again are just closely walking behind the events, but we are catching up. We are way closer to solve the situation than we have been in 2015. But we have to mention that the European Union is slow and bureaucratic. And to solve this issue, we cannot be slow and we cannot be bureaucratic. But at the same time, it's very hard to treat the migrants well as well, because the instrumentalization of migration especially is very harsh on the migrants as well, because their lives are in danger constantly, even in those states which are organizing the migration flows. People were dying in the Belarusian forests. That's a fact. But at the same time, the countries should focus on the well-being of their own citizens, and that's the right of the state all the times. So it's a very hard dilemma, and it's especially hard for European Union member states who are very proud of their humanitarian views.
Thank you very much, Robert. As you said, I'd like to underline we have more background, more tools, more experience in that. So we are definitely way more prepared than in 2015. Now I will give the floor to Bartosz with the same questions. First of them is the EU prepared for the next wave of mass migration? And the second one, what is EU doing to stop migration flows from Belarus and Ukraine?
Thank you, Maciej. I'll try to briefly refer to what Robert has said, and I'm glad that Robert has mentioned two, for me, I think, crucial things. The first, which with reference to the shift of the perception and the change of looking at the problem. I mean, we currently every day we are experiencing and we are observing the shift of paradigm in international relations. I mean, the European Union is based on is entangled in neoliberal paradigm, which demands multilateralism, which demands the strict bounds to the international law and this normative aspect. But yet, right now, what is currently going on just not so far away from us, from here, from Warsaw, is I mean, on the Belarusian border, is mostly linked to the neorealism, where the hard power of the state, the particular interests of the states, counts much more than the institutionalized over-national agenda. So this is very important to properly identify what we are dealing in actually with. So, as we have many times said in many European as well as national documents, what the threat to our security architecture is, which is we are pointing at Russia, we are pointing at Belarus. I mean, we will use the Poland example. So, taking advantage of that, we need to just take the active measures. I mean, if we want to effectively respond to it, we need to act, and we need to, put on these lenses on our eyes, the proper lenses that will allow us to see the problem in some different way than we normally see it, looking through the prism of the neoliberal paradigm. So that's the first one. And the second one, I'm glad that Robert mentioned that actually right now Belarus and Russia is one state in terms of security and defense, because they have complete and fully integrated their defense capabilities, defense bodies and defense apparatus, security apparatus, etc. So they are acting as a one state. So we do not need to differentiate Belarusian and Russian, whoever is behind what is going on the Polish-Belarusian border, we have to refer it to we have to take into account that Minsk and Moscow is responsible for that. Answering your question, is EU ready for the next mass migration flow? Yeah. I mean, what does it mean? Is it ready? In terms of socioeconomic condition, yes, we are ready. In terms of security and being able to accommodate potential terrorists, being able to accommodate potential spies, being able to accommodate in our societies potential threats to our security. No, we are not, because we are yet what Robert has said, and I'm glad that he mentioned that we are just learning. We have lots of lessons learned, but we are still dealing with that as a state, for instance, and in terms of Poland, because Poland has a much different situation of migration and dealing with migration than other Western states, because for 45 years we have been politically independent. We have been politically dependent, and we didn't decide it on ourselves in terms of internal and external issues, many of which. Were driven by Russia, by Soviet Union. So, for instance, we didn't participate in a whole migration debate in 60s, 70s, 80s, where when France, Western Germany, or Italy have taken part, and they were dealing with this issue at that time. So we have a very short historical perspective of migration as a nation, because mostly we have emigrated, more than 4 million Poles emigrated from Poland to the West and to other countries after World War II. So we do not deal. We are just starting to deal with this issue. As a I'm just taking to the Polish perspective. As a European Union. As I said, lessons learned, many things, many strategies have been established, introduced, etc., blah, blah, blah. But, this is European Union. I hope we will experience the real execution of this very courageously sounding statements on how we are going to deal with the migration problem. The fact is that Europe is in many cases a heaven for the people who are struggling with, for instance, the climate change. So looking not only on the European field, but also on the more broader and global perspective, where we need to change the refugee convention, because it lacks the environmental and climate aspect of the reason why people are migrating. There are not only wars, there are not only famine, there are not only political issues or security issues. There are also because of the climate change, it should be also added to the all acquis communautaire of the world international law regarding the refugees and the migration issues. As far as the Belarus, the second part of the question, could you please repeat once again?
Yes, of course. The second question was, what is EU doing to stop migration flows from Belarus and Ukraine?
To stop the migration flow from Belarus and Ukraine, they are mostly Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia are dealing with this issue. So EU, as you know, the best what EU has done so far is establishing Frontex, the only agency, the only body in the European Union and the whole history of the integration of the European Union which is armed and uniformed. So but it has also a very limited mandate, and it's limited to the authority of the hosting state. So except of coordinating activities on the external border and training and provide risk analysis. Frontex is unfortunately, I would like to stress it out, to the very little extent supportive in this phenomena. What EU is doing, a lot of is doing for Ukrainians as a whole. They are, trying to accommodate Ukrainians in every possible way. Like, for instance, the Netherlands are struggling with the lack of accommodation facilities right now because they have received a lot of Ukrainians. Germany as well. A lot has been done, a lot is being done, and a lot also must be done in the nearest foreseeable future because however the conflict between Ukraine, however the war between Russia and Ukraine will end, the issue of Ukrainian migrants in European Union will remain, and we have to deal with it, and we have to prepare for it, and we have to look at this phenomena in the much broader much broader scope.
Thank you very much, Bartosz. That was the last question of today. In fact, I had some more questions for you, but your answers to our viewers' questions already covered majority of those area. So once again, dear Robert, dear Bartosz, thank you once again for participating and sharing your insights and expertise with our viewers. And I highly encourage our viewers, observers, followers to follow our next debates. For example, this Wednesday, we are covering the Slovenian perspective for the 3Cs initiative. So I highly encourage everyone to join us as well. Gentlemen, once again, thank you very much. And I hope to see you next time.
Thank you for having us.